Cover the story. Don't be the story. It's lesson number 1 from day 1 for all journalists. Veteran newscaster Jorge Ramos, however, didn't have much of a choice. As explained in his memoir, Stranger, The Challenge of a Latino Immigrant in the Trump Era, Ramos was just trying to do his job. One candidate wouldn't let him. The minute Donald Trump announced his campaign on June 16, 2015, he simultaneously declared war on undocumented immigrants, specifically Mexicans, dismissed in his infamous diatribe as drug dealers and rapists. Ramos, as a star of the Univision network and proud Mexican-American, knew he had to respond. He immediately asked Trump for an interview, offering to meet him anytime, and included his cell phone number. Trump didn't respond directly. Instead, he mockingly shared the begging letter on Instagram along with Ramos' phone number. The journalist/American citizen immediately started receiving hate mail from people telling him to go back to his own country. It was his first encounter with the Trump effect. This is not a book about Donald Trump, writes Ramos. But his entry into politics and his rise to power are directly related to the growing anti-immigrant sentiment thriving across the United States. It's as bad as I've ever seen. As if Trump has given people permission to attack immigrants and make racist remarks. Ramos eventually did question the candidate in a made-for-TV moment that saw him ejected from a news conference. But the author is right, Stranger is not a book about Donald Trump. It's a book about immigrants. Ramos recalls growing up in Mexico City, surrounded by a loving family, educated in stern Catholic schools, nourished on a vibrant cuisine. Mexican-style eggs, shrimp broth, churrumais snacks, Maria cookies with La Abuelita butter, glasses of cold milk mixed with Pancho Pantera Choco milk powder, he recalls. These were all my favorites growing up. Today, they are comfort foods for those of us who return to visit. But as a child, Ramos also looked forward to the American candies brought back by his relatives after trips to Texas. And as a high school senior, he dreamed of the opportunities across the border. His parents couldn't afford the cost of an American college, so Ramos studied communications in Mexico before working on local radio and TV stations. He prospered, but quit when a story he wrote about political corruption was censored. It was time to go to America. Ramos jumped feet first into the melting pot, arriving in Los Angeles with a suitcase, a guitar, a student visa and a spot in a UCLA extension course. Home was a semi-legal collection of rooms rented to students from Ghana, Iran, and Pakistan. Their meals were lettuce sandwiches and salty ramen. Their calls home depended on a communal quarter, tied to a string and dropped, then retrieved, from the payphone in the hallway. A year after arrival, Ramos secured a 3-month tryout at a Spanish-language station. He hasn't stopped since. Nor has he stopped confronting the powerful about their treatment of the powerless. Party affiliation doesn't matter. Ramos still has a grudging affection for President George W. Bush, whose Texas roots seem to connect him with the Mexican people and their culture. The first American president who thought he spoke Spanish, Ramos teases. He remembers Barack Obama less fondly. Despite promises dating to the 2008 campaign, Obama never passed an immigration reform bill. Once in office, he stepped up the expulsion of undocumented workers, leading Latino activists to dub him the deporter-in-chief. Our first mistake, I realize now, was to believe in a political promise and to not do enough to make sure Obama followed through, Ramos writes of the missed chance. It was a serious case of political naivete. Ramos continues to use his pulpit to promote the immigrant cause and rebut the stereotypes. Immigrants are half as likely as native-born Americans to end up in prison, he writes. They not only take on the hard jobs, but create good ones for others. Some 40% of the founders of Fortune 500 companies are immigrants or the children of immigrants. This is why Ramos became so infuriated by Trump's immigrant bashing. And why, when the candidate didn't agree to an interview, Ramos decided to get one anyway. Television doesn't just happen, he notes. You have to create it. Ramos secured campaign press credentials, then caught up with the candidate in Iowa. After Trump finished answering a Fox News reporter, Ramos raised his hand and rose. Mr. Trump, he began, I have a question about immigration. Okay, who is next? Asked Trump, purposefully looking away. Ramos kept talking. Trump kept ignoring him. I have the right to ask a question, Ramos persisted. No, you don't, said Trump, finally acknowledging him. You haven't been called. Go back to Univision. The candidate motioned to a bodyguard. Ramos was taken by the arm and removed. Minutes later, Trump's then press secretary, Hope Hicks, caught up with Ramos in the hall and asked if he'd like to return. Ramos said he would, if he could ask his question. Hicks brought him back inside. "Good to have you back," Trump said, though what happened next wasn't exactly an interview. The Univision reporter would offer a fact, for example, "You would need to change the Constitution to deny citizenship to any child born in the United States." A fact challenged Trump would stubbornly disagree, "No, no, no. I don't think so." The reporter would cite a statistic: 40% of undocumented immigrants come in by plane, not through the border. "I don't believe that," Trump insisted. "I don't believe it." Ramos' effort was partly successful. He created great television by getting tossed from the news conference. But his attempts to get the candidate to seriously answer substantive questions? That was an utter failure, an experience previously shared by fellow journalists and discovered by many more once the candidate became president. Ramos hasn't stopped doing stories on Trump, or on immigration, racism, sexism, the economy and every other issue affecting America. Yet despite the success he has had here, the family he has raised, Ramos still feels a bit stateless. "I am a Mexican who lives in the United States and an American who was born and raised in Mexico," he explains. "I have 2 passports, I vote in 2 countries, I am an immigrant with 2 American children. I am bilingual, I speak Spanish with a Mexico City accent, and I speak English with a newcomer's accent." But, he writes, "I insist on being all things at once." Growing up in Mexico, building a career in the United States, it has all been good for him, Ramos says. He regrets nothing. "Well, maybe one thing. I have lost the ability to endure the spiciest of Mexican salsas," he admits. "What I wouldn't even have blinked at years ago would now make me cry." Tags: Donald Trump Books sent a letter to the editor. Join the conversation. Facebook tweet.